Artificial intelligence is coming, and this tech revolution, perhaps more than any such revolution that's gone before, will change the world. No life will be left untouched. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Pep Talk, the Persuasive Evangelism podcast from SOLAS. As that quote from our guest book today suggests, we are speaking about artificial intelligence, which has to be one of the most talked about subjects of our age. We all know it's going to change our lives, but we perhaps don't quite know how, or indeed how perhaps we should be reacting as Christians. So I hope this conversation helps us today. I'm Simon Wenham, your co-host, and I'm delighted to be joined by some natural intelligence, which may or may not have been artificially bolstered. And that is my colleague, Andy Bannister. Andy, how are you?
I'm doing well, Simon. It's good to be. It's been a wee while since I have been in the co-hosting chair, but great to be back with you on Pep Talk today. And we have a very exciting guest lined up, don't we?
We do. And before we come to that, though, Andy, I'd just love to say the reason we have you on specifically is this is an area that's actually very important to you. So before we get on to our guest, could you just say a couple of things about why artificial intelligence is particularly of interest to you?
Well, very, very kind of quickly, not still time from our amazing guests we're about to introduce. I was in Oxford, your neck of the woods, about 18 months ago, having coffee with a friend of mine who teaches at a theological institution there. And he threw into the conversation that he'd been doing a bit of work with ChatGPT. And I think I foolishly said, knowing nothing, I played with it a couple of years ago. It's rubbish, isn't it? To which he said, why don't you go home this evening and spend half an hour actually playing with it and come back and tell me what you think? And thus the entrance to a rabbit hole opened up. And I spent most of last year kind of reading into the field, Simon, for two reasons very quickly. Firstly, as that quote from the book says, it's changing everything. But secondly, as an evangelist, the evangelist in me is always looking for what are topics that people are talking about in culture that we can start from, like Paul does in Acts 17 with his unknown God speech. How can we start from something and bridge the gospel? And as I read my way into the AI field, I was like, my word, there are bridges here everywhere, all kinds of issues that AI raises that we can use as Christians to go, that's really interesting as we talk to our colleagues. So I'm excited that it's actually a huge gospel opportunity as well as something we need to think through culturally.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, watch this space, for more from Andy. And it's also a reminder, be careful what conversations you have with Andy. He might well start researching it a lot more. But we need to move on. And I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, who has written on this subject already. And he is Stephen Driscoll. He works for the Australian Fellowship of Evangelical Students in Canberra, and his book, Made in Our Image, God, Artificial Intelligence and You, was crowned the 2025 Australian Christian Book of the Year. So, Stephen, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Oh, thanks so much for having me on. I'm doing pretty well. I've put the three kids to bed, and I'm just sitting here. It's last light in Canberra, capital of our great cricketing nation.
We see what you did there.
Yeah, we were thinking we should probably avoid cricket, but it is fair enough that you have brought it up.
Ashes
and obviously,
to ashes.
That's right, and it is there is quite a time zone between us. Absolutely, and we wondered, before we get to talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence, could you just say a little bit about your own background and perhaps how you got into evangelism in the first place?
Yeah, so I'm in university ministry here in Australia, and we're always trying to train our Christians to think about an ever-changing world, and the topics that we train them to think about are different each year that passes. And I guess AI just started to become a topic that we realized that we had to start thinking about because everyone was thinking about it, and it's great for Christians to think about the new technological revolution that comes along because they're always practical. They reshape the way we do parenting. They reshape the way we do church, the way we share our faith with our friends. It's important that Christians think about these things as they come through, but it's particularly important that they think about them Christianly, if that makes sense. They actually, how does my Bible speak into this topic? So that became a bit of a passion for me.
It's perhaps a good kind of starting question for the conversation, Steve, might be one of the challenges is I think a lot of people don't know what they mean when we talk about AI. It's used in different ways. The media is full of buzz and noise and whatnot. So perhaps a good starting point would be, what is artificial intelligence, and maybe very briefly, how do we get to where we are and this cultural moment? So just perhaps give us the sort of view from 30,000 feet.
Yeah, I mean, some people will be interested in the history of it and the different attempts to build AI at different decades. I think that it's more helpful to think about what modern AI is, what the key moves are that have kind of unlocked a new level of intelligence over the last decade and a half. And I think the key move, if you don't know anything about AI, but you just want to slightly better visualize what's going on, I think the key move is to realize that it's heavily inspired by the structure of the human brain. It's less like old-fashioned computer programming and more like a human brain. And you've got all these quotes of the great ones of the last decade or two, explicitly saying, "I'm trying to emulate things from the brain into software." Demis Hassabis, whose name I always mispronounce, one of your own, an Englishman. He did his PhD in how a memory is stored in the human brain. And so there's constantly people trying to take these things and emulate them. And that's why we talk about neural networks, these kind of structures of billions or trillions of little kind of parameters or neurons. They're all wired up to each other. And then the key factor is the weights, that the strength of the connections between them. And the strengths can become very strong and very weak. And they can actually encode very complex patterns or knowledge or processes in these artificial brains.
Thank you. And you've touched upon this already, but we are obviously an evangelistic podcast. What has this got to do with evangelism?
Well, I mean, Andy spoke a second ago about bridges. You know, that events in the culture or in the news often provide bridges to the gospel. This bridge is a particularly good one. I think it's a Sydney Harbour Bridge, if you will. It's not a shabby bridge. Because think about what all the issues that AI raises. I mean, it raises the issue of identity and anthropology. So, what is a human being? If ChatGPT can produce our outputs, if it can emulate our intelligence, is it a person? And that issue is kind of back under discussion. And I think 99% of people that I'd speak to about that would recoil and say, "No way." So what's the difference? What's the difference between ChatGPT and me? Where does my personhood, my consciousness, whatever the terminology, where does it come from? And then we're into great discussions around the doctrine of creation and stuff like that. So that's one bridge, but there's bridges, I think, to all sorts of different Christian claims, and I think it's a great way to discuss the gospel.
Well, why don't we dig into that one a little bit more? Because I completely agree with you. As I was reading through the field kind of last year, I sort of began a journal making down notes and, okay, here's a link, and ended up with about sort of 30 different things. But the one you identify there, personhood and what it means to be human, I think that's always been the question, actually, Stephen, in different forms. So let's tease that out a little bit, because it's not just is ChatGPT a person. One of the questions that gets you into this with people is the very term intelligence. Because I think Christians can get nervous around this, can't they? Because if we think the Imago Dei, the image of God, equals intelligence, and then along comes a generative large language model that can at the very least to emulate it, if not actually behave intelligently, and then I think our non-Christian friends are just utterly confused all over the place as to what this means. So let's tease out the personhood theme for a minute around AI, and how, if you were talking to a student and sort of trying to start from sort of technology, how you might get them thinking about some bigger questions about who we are.
Yeah, sure. I'll propose a false approach or a bad approach, and then I'll propose an approach that I think is better. So the bad approach would be to say a sentence something like, "Oh, that's kind of impressive, but it'll never do X." And the X can vary, right? I've got examples of people, and the X was it'll never finish a sentence. It'll never understand the comma. It'll never understand tone. And it was kind of a retreating defense. And then it was, well, it will never be able to produce an image or poetry. And then it was, it'll never be able to do maths. And then it's like, well, of course it can do maths and win an international maths Olympiad, but it'll never. And it's this retreating defense that tries to deny the, to use your word, the intelligence of these things. And I want to actually give them that word. They are intelligent. If we can't give them that in 2026, then I don't deserve the term intelligence. They are really intelligent, but they're not persons. And that's an important distinction. In Genesis 2, I think it's verse 7, there's the description of the creation of the first human being. And we're actually made out of two things. We're made out of the ground, the Adama, the dirt. So we're kind of dirt people. But then that's not enough to bring life and personhood. God has to breathe his spirit, his ruach, his breath into this body, and then the body becomes a living being. So I think that there's two things that go into making a person. There is a physicality side to it, but it needs the spiritual.
Just to chip in there very, very quickly, but I don't want to interrupt the flow. It does occur to me, by the way, any Christian listening to you go, oh, hang on a moment with the intelligence thing. As Christians, we ought to be able to grant this because we believe in angels. And angels don't bear the image of God. They're intelligent. So we shouldn't actually be nervous by the idea that there are intelligent entities out there who are not made in God's image. The Bible was, well ahead of the curve on that one.
Yeah. That's a helpful thought that I've never really pondered. My thought that I always have when I think about this is that in a sense, God is the opposite of AI. Because AI is the physical side, but with no supernatural, no spirit, no soul. Whereas God is the spiritual person, but with no body. So they're the opposite to each other. But human beings are both. We're kind of spirit, but we're embodied. So a lot of people will be saying, well, they've got intelligence, therefore they must have personhood, therefore they must have moral rights and responsibilities. They should be voting. I don't know what other things will come with that. You cannot harm them. Now, we don't need to go that far. We've got this reason for, it's not special pleading. We've got this reason for saying, no, hang on, they're not persons. They are different to us. And I think we just have a superior point to which we can found our arguments, because non-Christians are going to start, I think, to say weirder and weirder things. Peter Singer is an Australian philosopher.
Yeah, I've debated Peter.
Yeah, fantastic. And he's tended to attach your moral personhood, your value, to your capacity, to your self capacity, to your intelligence, to what you can do, and so on. And on that basis, he's made very controversial arguments, trying to say that some people have more moral values than others, and implications for abortion and disability and all these sorts of different things. When AI has incredible capacities and intelligence, I feel like he would have to say, well, it has more moral value than us. Not that it's equal to us, but at some point that we're like ants, and it's the only morally important thing in the whole universe because of how self-aware and intelligent it is. I think that atheists are in a weird place. They're going to have to extend weird and implausible arguments, but Christians can kind of just go, no, our doctrine of creation has two parts, and we don't extend that one to artificial intelligence.
If you're enjoying today's podcast, would you carefully consider supporting the ministry of Solas? We do all kinds of work in evangelism and evangelism training and creating resources all over the UK, working with all kinds of churches to share the gospel. If you'd be willing to support us for as little as £4 a month, we will send you 2 copies of our book, Have You Ever Wondered? One for you to read and one for you to give away to someone who isn't yet a Christian. Hop over to our website, solas, solas-cpc.org, and look for the donate button at the bottom of the page. Thank you so much for considering supporting the ministry. And now, back to the programme.
Yeah, as you say, your point about Peter Singer is an interesting one, isn't it? I hadn't thought of that myself, because he extends personhood to saying actually certain animals with certain capabilities could be considered persons, and as you say, and they're not even on the same level as AI. So it's a very interesting discussion, and I can see exactly what you're saying about how this opens up so many interesting discussions. When I said what's this got to do with evangelism, that was a bit of a leading question. I absolutely agree. There's so many interesting questions. I mean, I think a lot of Christians can be slightly wary of new technology, especially something that everyone is telling us is going to transform everything. And you've been described as a tech realist, so you're in between a doom monger who said, we should be just rejecting AI, but you also say, we shouldn't just embrace it uncritically. Could you just say a little bit about what sort of attitude you think as Christians we should have to AI for those who are perhaps a little bit wary of knowing exactly what response we should be to this really fast changing area?
Yeah, definitely. So I think Christians will often react to a new technology by marshalling one half of their doctrine, but leaving the other half dormant. Some books, some authors, some thinkers will marshal the doctrine of sin very well, and think about all the ways the doctrine of sin informs the way we think about the new technology. But then it'll become an entirely negative book that just says don't do it. That canonizes whatever was done at the point, in the 1970s or the 1980s or the 1990s, but that doesn't actually give you principles to think about this new thing well and biblically. On the other hand, you do have optimists that is sort of so captured by the doctrine of sovereignty that they'll go ahead with anything. I think the Bible gives us both. To the pessimists, you've got passages like Isaiah 28:27, and I'll just read it out because I think it's really helpful. And it says, "Deal is not threshed with a threshing sledge, nor is a cartwheel rolled over cumin, but deal is beaten out with a stick and cumin with a rod. Does one crush grain for bread? No, he doesn't thresh it forever. When he drives his cartwheel over it with his horses, he doesn't crush it. This comes from the Lord of hosts, and he's wonderful in counsel and excellent in wisdom." So the wisdom that the Lord of hosts is kind of excellent in is actually technological wisdom in Isaiah 28. He's the God of wise technological usage. So the people who are purely pessimistic, I think, are missing some of the creation mandate joy of taking technology and subduing this world. Yeah, but the people who are just pessimistic, the people who are just optimistic, I think, can be naive about the doctrine of sin, and sin will flow through our usage of AI in 100 different ways.
Just to pick up on that a moment, though, I think also the other mistake I think one can make in there is, of course, put too much the focus on the thing. But if you take AI as a mirror, in fact, there's a very wonderful book actually on AI written by a non-Christian writer called Shannon Valor called The AI Mirror that I think really does quite a good job from a non-Christian perspective of raising some of these questions. And her point, and I think a good one for Christians to reflect on, is that technology mirrors us, doesn't it? It's like, take something perhaps a bit simpler, like nuclear power. That's neither good nor bad, but human beings can be good or bad. We're a mixed bag, and it reflects that. Is the same going on with AI? Is the issue that actually AI is one of the most powerful things we've created, and it reveals, lo and behold, that we are very complicated characters, which gives us a wonderful opportunity potentially to talk about the fall and what's gone wrong with us, rather than projecting that into the black box of the AI? Is it more we should be talking about us in here than it's out there?
More than any technology before, it is a mirror of humanity, because you have to train it. You train it by giving it a huge amount of language data. You actually scrape a high proportion of the internet and feed it into the large language model, the neural network, as training data. And we just don't have a data set of human beings being consistently holy and righteous and good and kind to each other. We've got the internet, and it's a shambles. And even the best places of the internet still mirror human depravity. Even Wikipedia is full of bickering, envy, factionalism. So the internet is full of sin, and the AI tries to imbibe, to predict human language. It works through the internet and tries to predict what humans would say next. And therefore, it learns a lot about human language, and it learns a lot about human nature, and it becomes a mimic. It really imbibes all of the sins of the flesh, and they're all in there. And so you could say that it's a multi-billion-dollar experiment testing the doctrine of total depravity. And,
that is superb.
And when it first came out, I mean, these things were so unhinged. People that actually were playing around in 2021, 2022 with these chatbots, they were totally unhinged. They were racist. They were sexist. They were just bullies, just absolute bullies. And that was the mimic at its absolute purest. And since then, these things have had to become products. The HR departments have become involved. And through reinforcement learning, we've sort of subdued some of those impulses in them. And they've moved a little bit towards being people pleasers rather than just this kind of debaucherous mimic. But it's a different kind of sin that we're seeing now. And every so often the mask comes down and you see the debauchery again. And if anyone that was on Twitter a few months ago saw the Twitter AI decide that it was a Nazi. And it called itself Mecha Hitler, Mechanical Hitler. So that debauchery is still there in the neural network. We've just tried to cover it a bit.
And there's so many different things you say that, and it's just a reminder of what we feed ourselves with, let alone what we're feeding AI with in terms of just affecting us and mirroring us. I mean, you mentioned the people pleaser issue. I thought that was particularly interesting in your work because, as you say, we've tried to subdue it and control it. And obviously there's been discussions about Grok recently about what it's doing. But I wondered, for Christians, when we're trying to communicate truth, how does this sort of AI programming, just to sort of keep us happy and please us, which obviously feels good, how can we, what balance can we have to the sort of impact of AI that is just designed to sort of feed us nice information that we like?
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about that, to be honest. I mean, I wonder what you guys think about that. But my guess is, as we're speaking, thousands of Bible studies around the world are being written by AI, once upon a time, it would edit your thoughts in a very clumsy way. I remember putting a sermon about the cross and sin into Gemini a few years ago. And it removed every mention of the cross and every mention of sin. It just turned it into a sort of a people-pleasing soup. Now they're much more. It's harder to catch them. They're wiser in the way they edit you. But I think they're just going to keep subtly turning sin into brokenness, if you know what I mean. They'll keep making guilt subjective instead of objective. They'll just keep weakening the message a little bit to make it a little bit more like the code of conduct of Google or Microsoft and a little bit less like the thing we read in the New Testament. So that's one danger to us, to Christians, this danger of this constant editing that we don't even notice that's just starting to affect some of the resources around us. Maybe the other danger is that it is a much better encourager than rebuker. And I think it's the book of Titus that says that the goal of a minister is to do both. And we all need both. And parents are supposed to do both. And we're supposed to do it to our friends, to encourage them, but also to know when to rebuke. And I think these things are really good encouragers.
Yes, I've often I've never actually tried it actually, but I've often imagined, I suspect if I fired ChatGPT up and said I was thinking of starting a new business, selling hand-carved wooden models of Simon Wenham on eBay, you would go, Andy, that's a brilliant idea. That's the best idea anyone's ever had. I suppose one last question for you, Stephen, and then we'll also get you at the end. We'll ask you a bit about where people can get the book from. But in terms of gospel kind of links, I think of all the chapters in the book, my favourite was chapter 5, where you talk about the cross and AI. And you made an absolutely brilliant point. I loved it when it was one of those paragraphs I reread a couple of times, thinking that is a superb link. And you made the observation that imagine we were to get to not just AI, which we're at, but artificial general intelligence, AGI, which everyone's working towards. That's an AI that can do pretty much anything you throw at it. AIs right now tend to be good at certain narrow things, right? But AGI would be good at anything. And so let's imagine we made one of these entities and it worked out what good was. It was perfectly good and perfectly just. It was actually, we'd succeeded despite all the internet we'd fed into it. And then we give it power. And then it looks at ours and goes, human beings are a plague. They're a total plague. It just basically, reinvents the Matrix. We're a plague on the earth, and look at the chaos you've caused: war, crime, disease, hatred. And it decides that the most just thing to do would be to euthanize every one of us painlessly because it's good, and it just removes humanity. And then you make the point, of course, you've got a gospel link there because God could have done that, and he didn't. So do you want to unpack that idea a little bit from I've summarized a little bit actually, but I love that chapter because you demonstrate in it how you can preach the gospel through the theme of technology.
Well, thanks. I think that's the first. You're the first person to have understood that chapter, which is congratulations to you, and to have explained it better
I'm
than I
sure
did.
that's not true, but
No, you're absolutely right. It's the Matrix. Even the smell of humanity just disturbs him. But it's also Ultron. Ultron, I think, gets access to the internet for about 30 seconds, and he concludes that we are a pest and that we should be gotten rid of. In the Bible, you see that just before the flood account. God's kind of looking at human beings and going, every thought they have, every inclination of their hearts is evil all the time. I should get rid of them. And in a sense, the whole story of the Bible kind of bounces off that moment where he's almost about to do it, and then he goes, "No, I'm going to do it a different way." That would be the obvious way to deal with the human race, but he chooses a much harder way to deal with the human race, which is then the story of the cross and him giving his own son to die for humanity. But I do think that's a helpful thing to think about. And I think one of the questions we have to keep wrestling with evangelistically is, at least in Australia, people just keep thinking they're basically good. They're good people. I'm all right, you're all right, we're good people. But there's all this evil in the world. Where's it come from? And therefore we descend to polarization and tribalism. It must be someone else's fault. And as Christians, we just keep proclaiming the universality of sin. Now, it's all of our fault. And therefore, God needed to come up with a problem that deals with the reality of sin.
As we alluded to at the start, Stephen, given what's happened fairly recently in terms of the cricket, we don't need convincing that Australians are not good people. I'm
That's why you sent us here, right? You put us on boats.
Yeah, by the way, as you described that, the other thing I was going through my mind is that none of this is new too, because that theme, if you want to see that theme in an older way, go read Frankenstein. Go read Mary Shelley's kind of novel, because that's playing with the same idea. The monster looks at humanity and goes, "You guys are monstrous. I'm going to mirror myself on you." Well, we've covered so much in 26 minutes, and there's a whole lot more we could talk about. But Stephen, it's been absolutely fascinating conversation. I mean, thank you first of all for taking the time to dig into this. I think when I first began reading into this a year ago, I got almost a bit disillusioned that every Christian I came across was either just like wildly utopian, "Hey, isn't it amazing?" and let's get on with it, or were like dystopian, writing books whose even very titles, suggest the whole thing was a disaster. And then I came across your thing, like, it was like a man coming across an oasis in the desert for me, going, "Oh my word, this is thoughtful and reflective, and there's a lot of wisdom in here and very practical." So thank you for taking the time to write it. So how do people find the book? What's the best way for people to get hold of Made in Our Image?
So in Australia, it's Matthias Media. In Britain, did you say it was 10?
10 of those.
10 of those.
Yeah, 10 of those.
In America, you can choose either 10 of those or Matthias Media. Matthias Media is an Australian Christian book publisher.
Fantastic. So what we'll do is we'll put a link to the book into the show notes, so people can then dig it out. And highly recommend that people get a copy, have a read, and hopefully, God willing, it will create loads of gospel opportunities for you as your colleagues, friends, neighbours. If you're a student, others on campus are talking about these things, Stephen's book will help you go, I don't just need to talk about the technology. I can use it to talk about the God who is the author of it all. So Stephen, once again, thank you for being on the show. It's been a pleasure to have had you on today.
Thanks so much, Simon. Thanks, Andy.
And Simon, we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another episode of Pep Talk and another guest. So in the meantime, take care and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.